In part one, we looked at sugary drinks, ultra-processed foods, heavily salted or pickled foods, and alcohol, and how they can shape the metabolic and inflammatory environment inside the body. But now we come to the category that creates more confusion than almost any other: meat. Processed meat and unprocessed red meat are often placed in the same box, even though the evidence is not the same. And what happens next may depend not only on the meat itself, but also on what you eat with it and how you cook it. There is also one study coming up that may completely change the way you think about this debate. Then I will give you the simple 5-step framework that brings everything together. Let's continue. Now, this next category is very controversial or gets a lot of attention, and that is processed meat and red meat. And we have to approach this carefully because the science is not as black and white as some headlines make it seem. Many studies show a very strong association between higher intake of processed meats, so this would be things like bacon or sausage or hot dogs or deli meats, and an increased risk of colorectal cancer. In fact, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. And the American Cancer Society guidelines report that each additional serving, or about 2 ounces of processed meat per day, increases the risk of developing colorectal cancer by about 23%. And processed meats have also been linked to higher risk of other cancers, including breast cancer and lung, esophagus, and prostate cancers. Now, before we go deeper into this, there's an important distinction that we have to make because processed meat and red meat are often lumped together. But the data is very different for each one, and we should not approach them the same way. A recent review published last year pointed out that processed meats consistently show more harmful effects compared to unprocessed red meats. So that already tells us something important. It suggests that processing and preparation may matter just as much as the food itself. Now, when it comes to processed meats, the mechanisms are fairly clear. These foods often contain nitrites and nitrates, which are used for curing and preservation, and they add flavor. When these compounds enter the acidic environment of the stomach, they can form nitrosamines like NDMA, and these are known carcinogens that can damage DNA, and DNA damage is one of the first steps in cancer development. Now, with unprocessed red meat, the picture is more nuanced. There's still observational data that shows associations with certain cancers, especially colorectal cancer, but the link is weaker. That's why it's classified as a Group 2A carcinogen, meaning there's limited direct human evidence, but strong biological plausibility. A 2019 review published in the Annals of Internal Medicine concluded that reducing meat intake had only small effects with low certainty evidence and suggested that people continue their current intake. But the following year, the American Cancer Society actually responded to the paper. They pointed out that that review focused heavily on randomized controlled trials and placed less weight on observational studies. And this is where the debate really comes from, because nutritional research is not straightforward. So real quick, broadly, there are 2 main types of studies. There's randomized controlled trials, and then there's observational studies. With a randomized controlled trials, you control what people eat and isolate just one variable. And that gives you stronger cause and effect data. But for cancer, this is very hard to do because cancer takes years, maybe even decades to develop. So you would need to control people's diets for 10, 20, even 30 years with perfect adherence. And realistically, that's just not possible. So this is where observational studies come in. They follow large groups of people over long periods of time, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people for decades, and then they look at patterns. For example, people who eat more red meat have higher rates of colorectal cancer. So the strength here is the scale and time, but the limitation is you can't control everything. People who eat more red meat may also eat fewer vegetables or have different lifestyles. And researchers do try to adjust for this and account for these confounders, but they can't remove it completely. And another big weakness is a lot of nutritional research relies on food diaries, where people recall what they ate the previous day or last week, and those can get pretty inaccurate. So you're always balancing the two. Randomized controlled trials, on one hand, give you stronger cause and effect, but in shorter timelines and less realistic data that you may not be able to generalize to large populations. On the flip side, observational studies give you long-term real-world data, but more uncertainty and more bias. So this is why you see debates like this, because depending on how you weigh the evidence, you can come to very different conclusions. And with something as nuanced as cancer, we have to look at both types of studies and make the best prediction based on the totality of the available evidence. Is there a link between unprocessed red meat and cancer? Absolutely. But the way I see it, it's not just about the meat itself. It's also about what's missing from the diet. Because if you eat more of one thing, you often eat less of something else. And in many cases, that something else is fiber. And fiber is one of the strongest protective factors against colon cancer that we see across many studies. Because fiber provides so many protective things at once, it regulates blood sugar, and it feeds the beneficial gut bacteria. And those bacteria produce compounds like butyrate, which then reduce inflammation and support colon health. And there was an interesting study that highlights this. So this was published in the British Journal of Nutrition, where researchers had participants eat about 300 grams of red meat per day. And this increased a marker linked to DNA damage in the colon by 21%. But when they added 40 grams of resistant starch, which is a type of fiber, to the red meat, that increase in DNA damage markers completely disappeared. It just went back to baseline. And in the study, they used a resistant starch powder, but you can get it from whole foods like potatoes and legumes and green bananas. So what this suggests is the effect of red meat may depend heavily on your overall diet. If red meat is displacing fiber-rich foods, well, that creates one type of environment, an environment that may increase your risk of colorectal cancer or other cancers. But if red meat is combined with enough fiber or resistant starch, that environment can look very different. So my main takeaway is to have a nuanced approach and avoid extremes either way. If you're eating red meat every day, probably not a good idea. But red meat 1 or 2 times a week, I don't think there's enough evidence to say that will increase your risk of cancer, especially if you pair it with fiber-rich foods. Now, there is one more layer that often gets overlooked, and that is how the meat is cooked. When meat is grilled or fried or barbecued at very high temperatures, it can form very harmful compounds. So compounds like heterocyclic amines or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And both of these compounds have been shown to damage DNA, which can then lead to cancer. So again, it's not just about what you eat, it's also how you prepare it. You can reduce this by pre-cooking your meat before grilling to limit that time over high heat. And then you can use marinades with herbs and garlic and onions or vinegar, which has been shown to help limit the formation of these compounds. It helps to avoid sugary marinades because those burn very quickly and increase the risk of charring. And another thing that can help is choosing leaner cuts of meat. Less fat means less dripping and less smoke, and fewer of those harmful compounds getting back onto the meat. So, let me give you the simple framework that I promised at the beginning. Because after hearing a list like this, it is easy to walk away thinking that everything is dangerous. And that is not the goal. The goal is to create a dietary environment that supports normal metabolism, keeps inflammation lower, feeds the healthier gut microbiome, and gives your immune system the nutrients it needs to do its job. The first step is to remove the fastest metabolic hit. And for most people, that means liquid sugar. You do not need to obsess over every gram of carbohydrate. Just start with the drinks. Replace soda, sweet tea, sweetened coffee, energy drinks, and frequent juice. That one change can remove a large amount of sugar without making your meals smaller or leaving you hungry. The second step is to build your meals around foods that still look like food. So vegetables, whole fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and minimally processed whole grains. These foods bring fiber and phytochemicals into the diet, and they also crowd out the packaged foods that tend to create problems. You do not need every meal to be perfect, but if most of the plate comes from whole foods most of the time, your internal environment changes. The third step is to think about what you are pairing together. If you eat meat, pair it with a large serving of vegetables, beans, or another fiber-rich food. If you eat rice, add vegetables and protein instead of eating a large bowl of rice by itself. If you eat fruit, choose the whole fruit more often than juice. The combination matters because meals are not single nutrients. They are packages, and those packages influence digestion, blood sugar, the microbiome, and satiety. The fourth step is to reduce frequency before you chase perfection. Processed meat once every few months is very different from processed meat every morning. A dessert at a celebration is very different from dessert after lunch and dinner every day. A grilled steak occasionally is very different from heavily charred meat several nights a week. Cancer risk is shaped by patterns and exposure over time. So, focus on what you repeat. And the fifth step is to be careful with the idea of superfoods. There is no single berry, tea, spice, or supplement that can cancel out a diet built around sugary drinks, processed meats, and ultra-processed foods. Protective foods work as part of a pattern, and supplements are not automatically better just because they are concentrated. In some cases, high-dose supplements can behave very differently from the same nutrients found naturally in food. And one practical way to make this easier is to change what you keep around you. Most people do not make food decisions in a laboratory. They make them when they are tired, hungry, busy, or stressed. So if the easiest option in the house is a sugary drink and a packaged snack, that is probably what gets consumed. But if you have washed fruit, plain yogurt, nuts, boiled eggs, hummus, or leftovers from a whole food meal ready to go, the default choice changes. And do not confuse processing with ultra-processing. Washing, chopping, freezing, fermenting, or canning a food does not automatically make it unhealthy. Frozen vegetables, canned beans, plain oats, and unsweetened yogurt can all be convenient options. What concern is when a product is built mostly from refined starches, added sugars, industrial fats, flavor enhancers, and additives, while providing very little fiber or satiety. So the front of the package may say natural, high protein, or made with whole grains, but the ingredient list and the nutrition profile often tell a more complete story. A simple shopping rule is to ask whether the product helps you build a meal, or whether it is designed to disappear while you are distracted. Beans help you build a meal. Frozen berries help you build a meal. A bag of chips is designed to be eaten quickly and to make you want another handful. Again, this is not about never eating chips. It is about recognizing rich foods should be staples and rich foods should be occasional. When the staples are right, the occasional foods matter much less. So a realistic week might look like this. Most drinks are unsweetened. Most meals contain a clear source of fiber. Processed meat is rare. Red meat is occasional rather than daily and is cooked without heavy chime. Alcohol is reduced or avoided. And packaged foods are treated as convenience foods, not the foundation of the diet. That is not an extreme diet. It is just a pattern that makes the internal environment less favorable for chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and the processes that can support cancer development. And I also want to be very clear about what this information can and cannot do. Eating well can lower risk, but it cannot guarantee that cancer will never happen. And food is not a substitute for screening, medical evaluation, or cancer treatment. If you have unexplained weight loss, persistent bleeding, a new lump, a change in bowel habits, or any symptom that does not go away, do not try to fix it with a diet. Get evaluated. Prevention and early detection have to work together. All right, I hope this gives you a practical way to think about food and cancer without fear and without extremes. If you found this helpful, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more evidence-based information on metabolic health and longevity. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.